Buffering. Good to go.
All right, good.
Hey, well, welcome everyone. Thanks for joining our Tech Talk this Friday. We have a special guest. We have Wilfrid Landry, and he has 10 years of experience in software development, and they're going to talk about domain-driven design. So thank you so much for being here, and take it away.
Hi there. Thanks for having me. So I wanted to say just about the purpose of today. Domain-driven design is a really huge topic, and I called this domain-driven development because this is really just about my experience in trying to take domain-driven design into practice, working with different teams and organizations over the last few years. And so the goal here is not to give a course on domain-driven design because it is so large, but just wanted to introduce you to the concept and introduce you to some of the core ideas so that maybe you will get more interested in it and you can study more. And I've found that it's really valuable in my approach, and I think you can also find a lot of value through this as well. So I've been in the industry for 10 years. Yeah, working for a lot of different organizations, and I've seen a lot of different approaches to the software development. And it seems that there's a really common approach to agile development and Scrum, but there isn't really a common approach to understanding and designing the systems. And so a friend introduced me to domain-driven design a few years in, and then I really dug into it and read the books and studied it. I'm still don't consider myself an expert, but I found that just even the simple part of it, the most basic concepts that are involved are really helpful in working with your team and coming to a common understanding so you can build better software together, get there faster and build better. So, what do I mean by domain? And some of the domains that I've worked in where I had to get up to speed really quickly was web publishing, for instance. And what I mean to define that by is when you go into a specific business and you need to learn about how everything works and what are things called, um, who who can you talk to and how can you get up to speed really quickly in those new domains. So some of the domains that I'm familiar with are web publishing, and I worked in some political apps and with dealing with campaigns and finance, and I worked in clinical trials and drug development domain for a while. And that was one of the times that I really dug deeply into using this approach to try to understand how things are organized. Right now, I'm in e-commerce, and that is its own domain. Uh, so so yeah, what is domain-driven design? It's an approach to software development for complex businesses and domains where you focus on the complexity by trying to understand who are the actors in the domain and the knowledge and the objectives that they are after, and try to map and model the concepts of the business to the software itself. So there's a one-to-one relationship between the ideas in the business domain and in the software. Um, and when you're doing that, the thing that you want to do is work when you come into a new domain. You need to learn something really quickly, and as you develop out the software, you'll end up you need to find the domain expert and start talking to them, asking them questions. And in a lot of times, this is the only domain expert you can really get to is that product manager. And so that product manager will tell you what the business needs are and what you need to do to move forward. In other situations, you might be able to talk to someone who is working in clinical trials, for instance, or a doctor or a someone who knows the topic really well and can help you define it. And what you want to do is essentially try to build. I like this quote from Elon Musk in this idea that fundamentally you want to look at the new domain through first a semantic tree and just what are the root things, services, value, objects that exist here, and how do you seek to understand them more quickly. Let's see here. And so domain-driven design gives you these building blocks that you can use, which we're going to come back to these later, but it's all about when you're working in the software, how do you use these building blocks to build up that semantic tree where you can easily talk about the different parts of the domain and map the software to it. So we'll come back to these building blocks here. This idea, I see there's a question there. So in this sense, domain, we mean like a specific sphere of activity or knowledge, like the domain of psychology, or going back to what we were talking about earlier, the domain of web publishing, where you have authors who are building materials and they need to publish those materials. And there's a process for publishing, there's a process for delivery. There's when you get into a new job, you might be working in the web publishing industry, for instance, or you might be working in e-commerce, right, where you have to think about products, sales, how the products are going to be produced, and then how they're going to be sold. And so all of those domains have individual unique characteristics, unique actors, unique roles of people, and unique ways that you define the entities and objects that are in that domain. So you need, first of all, just to learn the lingo. What do you call things, and how do they, and who's involved and what are they trying to do? So the domain-driven design has been around forever, and was written by this guy, Eric Evans, long ago, before microservices are really agile had been thought of, but it works really well, and it's kind of come back around as a valuable way to approach software again. And it's built on this modeling, on being collaborative, number one, where you can have a conversation with the business people and the product managers, and you're not going to be speaking just completely Greek to them, where you go into a bunch of technical mumbo jumbo and they don't know what you're talking about. Let's see, I'm looking at the question here. So the process is built on modeling and structuring the code so that it maps to the structure of the domain and how people talks. And like I said, the business user should be able to look at what you're doing technically and get a good idea of how the overall system works. And the system should be able to react to changes in the business. So if something happens here, we can easily code that change because we call things by the same name. So when there's an event in the business, we also can react to that. All right, so I think we got the core part. So remember this presentation by Daniel Soibel, I think you say, from a couple of weeks ago, on about how to work with designers. I thought this was really good. He talked about the development life cycle and how to work with designers. And at the end of the talk, he talked about, there was this question that came up from the audience about any advice on getting designers, developers on the same page in terms of what to call things. And this is one of the key problems that DDD hopes to solve. And that is that you can, is to get the things, to get on the same page with users. And you do that through something that's called the ubiquitous language. And that is one of the components of, one of the principles of how to put domain-driven design to work. So there's a lot to putting the design to work. So I'm just going to talk today about a couple of these. We've already talked a little bit about model-driven design, and then we'll just talk a little bit about ubiquitous language and the bounded context. So the ubiquitous language goes back to this idea of modeling the software based on the business domain and based on the expertise of the domain experts. So when they're talking about the elements of a research project, you'll name the classes according to the things that they talk about, and you want to make sure that you enforce this idea, because I've been in situations where the business team calls this one thing, even something simple as a badge and a flag, right? So on different models, you want to put a badge. On other models, you want to put a flag. And little changes like that in language between the product team and the development team can lead to major delays and a lot of mistakes in the software building over time. So you do kind of have this Tower of Babel. So you use the model as the backbone of the language, and you commit the team to exercising that language relentlessly in all communication within the team and code. So we're going to name everything the same, and that solves a lot of problems. So going back to putting the model to work, the other thing to think about in terms of domain-driven design is this bounded context. So when you have a large domain like in e-commerce, where you have a product model, but you have people who are shipping the model and people who are selling the product, in the enterprise way of doing things, those would all be based on the same database table, and you wouldn't ever need to change how those things work. But in this thing, you separate those into a bounded context, and you draw a line around it and say, we're only dealing with the storefront here, and we're only dealing with the product in the context of the storefront, or we're only dealing with the product in the context of shipping. So those don't have to be the same models in the code, and they don't have to be in the same database. Now you want to separate those things out and just have them talk to each other when an event occurs. So once this product is sold, we send a message to the shipping context, and they know to start putting it together to ship it out the door. And so this context tends to mean everything, in the sense of, why is this funny? Is because it's when you take something out of context, it can be very funny. But we really use this tool as a way to separate and organize the code in this way. And this is an example from a Martin Fowler presentation, but where you have products in each context, but they might share a global user ID, but the software around them and the models around them are all unique. And that might be better with a more concrete example as you dig more into that, but if that's not clear. So any questions right now? So, no, okay.
No.
Yeah.
No questions. We're good.
Okay, great. So this is an example of how the Shopify API divides up the different bounded contexts. You have the admin API, where you're dealing with all of the components of running the e-commerce site, where you might be dealing with taking orders and shipping and calculating taxes and processing payments. And then you have the storefront API, which is all about selling it. And this is a good example of how in domain-driven development, you'll separate those different contexts, and then you'll develop from that standpoint. And like I said, this is in contrast to the enterprise application architecture way of doing things, which would be that you would just have one table and one model, and it would have to do everything for the entire enterprise, and you would inject different behavior into that model. In domain-driven development, you think a lot about who is the actor, who is the persona, what are their objectives, what's the context, and what is it exactly that they need to do. And that's what we build the software for. We don't build the software for every possible eventuality. And if you do, then that's the type of software that I've seen that has a lot of bugs, because you want to leave it open to endless configuration or endless changes. But really what we want to do is focus in and do it for a specific circumstance, specific user with a specific end goal. All right. So these are the building blocks, and this is how you would go about it when you go into a new domain and you want to figure out how to structure the software, or how to approach it, how to organize your thoughts, how to grok the domain. You use these tools, and I'm just going to talk about a couple of them. The main tool is an entity, right? So these are all the things. All the things is the first thing you need to come up with. And in e-commerce, it's products and orders and taxes and whatever you can come up with, right? All the things. Entities are the things. And then an aggregate is when you have a bunch of small parts that you have to put together into a large aggregate. For instance, if you're in web publishing, you would say there are these authors who are working. They're writing different pages. They create different chapters. You might have we had at that time an application that helped them organize and write those pages and create different sections. And then the aggregate is when you put all of that together into a body of work that you might call a book, or whatever the name of that is. So that would be like the aggregate of all of these entities, in this case, made up an aggregate book. And then, so you got your entities, you got your little things, you got your aggregates, and that helps you organize your semantic tree a little bit. And then you have your services. This one service might be publishing. So the process of getting all of those pieces together, building up a book, and then publishing it into a different format, so you create a new final product. The other thing to think about a lot is value objects. So these are the calculations of things that you might need, and this is often where the real secret sauce comes in, and the real the math and the algorithms come in. So a value object is something that might be calculated, like a credit score, or a recommendation, or a probability that this will be successful, or if you're doing a weather app, probability that it will rain this afternoon. Like those are the value objects are the calculations that make up the domain and really add value, right? So I'm going to skip modules and factors because that's a little bit in the weeds here, and then talk about repositories. And that is one thing that I've seen a lot in different organizations, is that they'll start out with one type of database, and then they'll just continue to use that database for all the different needs of the organization. And of course, nowadays with the cloud, you have so many more options. And what you want to do is create repositories for your big aggregate objects or for your different can't think of your larger bodies of work that you produce. So this could be like in the concept of the web publishing, where you have the authors who are writing the books. The book is the aggregate, and then when you publish those, you put those in a different data store. It's a repository which has its own interface that you can interact with and access all of those large objects. And so from this is just a kind of an introduction. I just wanted to kind of give you the lay of the land and show you that this is a good approach for, especially if you're involved and you have those type of problems where no one can get on the same page about what things are called and where you're going, to just bring in some of the basics of this DDD. And there are some great trainings out there. I want to recommend this LinkedIn training course by Alan Holub. Let's see here. Okay, yeah. On LinkedIn training. So this is really good if I probably went through this pretty fast and didn't address a lot of the deeper points. So this is a really good training course if you are interested in this and also want to get a deeper understanding and want to be able to apply this as you move forward in your career. But it is a great way, especially when you come into a new job and you're in a new industry and you need to make sense of it, is to go at it using these building blocks and try to name all the things, name all the services, name what are the real value objects, and get that tree of knowledge in your mind so you can start to take control of your environment and build some software based on those logical conclusions. And with that, I'll just take some questions if you have any.
All right. So attendees can ask questions. You can raise your hand, you can unmute your mic, or you can add them to the chat box.
Looks like there's a question in the chat box from Leonardo. So how do you define the boundaries of a bounded context, and how do you communicate between contexts? So maybe share a view.
Yeah, that's a great question. Maybe I should. What do you mean by VO? VO is, but in a lot of times, what you want to get to is this point of event-based communication, where you have, first in defining the boundaries, is what is the logical way that the people who are working in this industry separate things out. I'm trying to think of another example, but in clinical trials, for example, you're thinking about a study, and there are these different phases in the study. And one phase is where you're trying to get the study cited and into a certain place. And then there's the beginning of the study. And then once the study begins, it's a much different scenario. That's one example of those software systems are totally different, right? But even in the sense of the e-commerce idea, you have what are the people who are working in the real world thinking about? Like when the people who go to work every day in the shipping department of your e-commerce company are not thinking about the product in the same way that the merchandising and the sales team are thinking about. They all have to deal with this product as it comes from manufacturing to then being packaged, being sold, and then being shipped. But you try to think about the real world and what those boundaries are in the real world, and how those things are separated out. And then how you communicate is you try to get to an event-based system, so that when an event occurs, like this product was just sold, you have a messaging system. Like I've used in different situations Amazon's simple queue service, or a different queue, where the other software system and or microservice, the other application, can listen for when events occur on the product, and then it reacts to whatever has happened, as opposed to in the old way where transactions happen in the database and everything has to be atomic and synchronous. In this case, you get to this point of eventual consistency, but the idea is just that you listen for changes. You wait and listen on the queue, and then when something happens in one bounded context, you let everyone know about it who needs to know. So I think that I did that one. But yeah, it takes some time, and it takes some, yeah, thank you. It takes some time, and it takes some long training. I thought about this a lot before I started developing with it, but it's interesting that we're in this situation where you get into your job, and you have your tickets, and you go straight to work on one little part of the software system. But this gives you the ability to try to peek your head up and understand how everything should work, and how to understand what needs to happen, and what's going on in a bigger context.
So do you find this being implemented more and more with companies in the industry?
Yeah, that's a great question. I find so there's certain companies that have really caught on to it, and they're gung ho about it. They're bringing it through. A lot of times you implement it through just your day-to-day behavior, in the sense of how you talk to the product manager. And you don't always have the power to stop and say, hey, let's start doing domain-driven development now. You have your day-to-day job, but I think that the companies that do implement it will be successful. I do see some job postings where people are, put it as part of their approach to software and part of their team technique. And so some people are explicitly doing it, but in my day-to-day, I just try to bring in some of these core concepts. And if you walk away with just one simple thing from this talk, it's that ubiquitous language point, is that if everyone speaks the same language about the models and what they are and what they're supposed to do, that improves development productivity massively. Like that one little thing is you have to enforce it, and you have to say, remind people to always use those terms.
Yeah, and it does definitely make things more efficient, and you can get things done faster when everyone's using the same language.
Yeah.
Looks like Joshua has I don't know if it's really a question, but they say that I'd be really interested to hear more about modules and factories and the role they play.
Yeah, that is a good point. And I don't want to go too deep in it because I don't want to get it wrong. But in the factory sense is kind of how you produce those large aggregates. For instance, like if you're back in the publishing domain. So the factory is how you organize the production of these different publications. And there's a factory pattern in the, I can't think of what the name of the group of programming patterns is. But there's a pattern called the factory pattern, and it's about applying that to the software where you're going to produce a bunch of these big aggregate models, which are made up of a bunch of of things, a bunch of entities, right? So when I want to produce a book, how do you organize the code to pull in all of those smaller pieces, validate them, and then generate a larger body of work. I was like, if there's a word I can put through here, but yeah. So in modules is just organizing. I mean, in Ruby, a module is just like essentially a way to organize a bunch of methods, or you could, if you had the different bounded contexts, you could put them all into one module if you had it all in one single code base. So you wouldn't necessarily have to have multiple code bases. You could just have the shipping namespace that you put into a module, and as a way of organizing all of that bounded context into one single place. And then there's, in the domain-driven development design reference, there's a lot of advanced conversations about how to organize code and how to build a context map, and it's just more than we should get into today with this talk. But that would be something that you could definitely, if you're interested in these books here by Eric Evans. Let me share. Did I share this? So, in any case, the Eric Evans book, and then there's the Domain-Driven Design Distilled by Von Vernon, and that's also a really good book because the original textbook came out so long ago. So much has changed, and there's Domain-Driven Design Distilled by Von Vernon is a great book to kind of get the key points and really get going with the situation. But this LinkedIn training course, I'd say one more time, by Alan Holub, is definitely a must watch if you want to start thinking about this approach or using it in the future. So yeah.
And there's a link in the chat box for the references to the books with Eric Evans. So anyone can definitely check those out. And do we have any other questions for Wilfrid? I know Wilfrid's got to wrap it up early. He's got another meeting at 12:45. And Regina, do you want to add your blurbs for the end?
My links, yeah, let me plug everything in. But if anyone has any questions for Wilfrid, you can definitely get in contact through LinkedIn. I just put that in the chat box. Also, we do have another talk next week. It's going to be on search engine optimization. Here's the link to that if you're interested in joining us for that one. Let's see, what else do I have? Here's our link tree. It has all of our school information, school website, all of our social media, how to contact us if you have any questions on the Tech Academy. But yeah, so go ahead and check those out. Let me know if you have any questions. Thank you, Wilfrid, for joining us for an awesome talk. And I hope everyone has a great weekend.
Thank you. I hope it was helpful.
Yeah, thank you so much.
No, it was good, Wilfrid. Thanks for coming out. We appreciate it.
Take care.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks, everyone, for coming out. And we'll see you next week.
See you guys next week. Don't forget to stop the recording.